The biggest story in Canadian soccer this week, though, was not with the national teams, but rather the club team. Toronto FC finally getting out of the Italian debacle, the situation with Lorenzo Insigne and Federico Bernardeschi finally coming to an end. They reach a deal to mutually terminate both contracts. They're out of the club. TFC don't exactly make it count in their first game back. They lose 3-1 to New York City FC. But this era or error of Toronto FC is finally over, Brendan, and they have a chance to move on. How important was this week for TFC?
Oh, man. Happy Canada Day. Arrivederci, bros. That was wild, honestly. I did not, I know most people didn't expect that news to come, and the double dose was a real shocker. You know, it broke first overnight, I think before you went to bed, Ben, Fabrizio Romano saying, Insigne is going to be out. And then it was Bernardeschi too, which is a real double surprise. I think that's mixed as well for Toronto FC fans who kind of felt like, you know, Bernardeschi was playing for his contract, and while it wasn't always successful, that to lose him as well maybe wasn't necessarily the best move or deserved for him. That maybe he'd done a little more to kind of earn the rest of his paycheck or earn the opportunity. At the same time, he wanted a new opportunity clearly and wanted out. So I'm sure the club, weighed that as well. And the buyout was very expensive. It's a very, very expensive error. MLSE, many clubs, it's not just an attack in MLSE, but many teams have, been guilty of that before. But to see this come to an end and this be the final chapter, the final page in what was a tremendously high potential opportunity, just to be so disastrous. It's sad. It's really sad because Toronto FC should be one of MLS's biggest clubs, and they should be the biggest club team in Canada, in my opinion. They've spent like it, but it certainly hasn't worked, out on the pitch. And I'm happy that they'll have a new chapter, but that doesn't mean that good days are ahead. And I think that game in New York was just a great example of that. That you don't have the freedom bounce that I think some people would have expected, like when you get a new manager bounce. That didn't translate in the Bronx, and I don't think that's going to translate this season. So they will spend money again. I hope that they do it wisely. I certainly don't know if Josh Brownhill, who that was the story today when we're recording, at a €20 million offer supposedly for the Burnley man. I don't know if that's the right move, but they get to finally do things differently. And they had been really handcuffed for the last 2 years. So there's at least that.
Yeah, it's just shocking to look at their roster now and look at 0 designated players, essentially 0 U22 players, because Cassius Malala, he's on loan. He doesn't count. They're probably going to get rid of him. Like, that's about as clean slate as you're going to get. You don't see that very often in MLS, the fact they can essentially sign up to 6 quote-unquote DPs, because for me, the U22s are essentially DPs, just if used correctly, of course. That's huge, because we talked about ripping off the Band-Aid, clearing the culture, hitting the reset button. This is about as good of a chance as they've had since the Italians have come in, where there's so many questions of they need this, they need that, but there's the Italians, the weights, they're holding it down. Those weights are gone. I think now the key will be not to get overexcited, not to, like, for example, what I don't like about the Josh Brownhill isn't that could be a bad signing. It's just, if that's, again, your DP you're looking at right away, is that necessarily the right approach? You want to be prudent and maybe have an eye on the next 3 to 5 years. But this is really an opportunity for TFC to shift gears. And I think that's something where they're going to need to be very careful, because it can be easy to look at all this space and all of a sudden the names start to swirl and you can be looking at big transfers, but that's what got you in this mess in the first way. Be smart about it, but it'll be really telling what they do this summer, because there are going to be some great options here this summer. That's the beauty of summer transfers in MLS. There's also going to be some very bad options on the table. And if TFC doesn't find the right DPs until summer of 2026, then so be it. You've been given this chance to rebuild. It's almost better to let it play out with the guys you have, let that culture start to reset and go from there. So just a huge opportunity, and hopefully one that Toronto is fully cognizant of okay, just because the weight's gone doesn't mean you need to go right back into the market, so to speak.
So is the solution for TFC wait until the World Cup next year, see who wins the World Cup, and then see who is a free agent based on their transfer market page, and then go sign them to a $15 million contract? Is that kind of the plan for TFC?
On that one.
I'm of course joking, that being the Bill Manning strategy.
Yeah, no, of course. I do think that Toronto, in comparison to obviously the other two MLS teams in Canada, but a lot of the other, marquee MLS markets, I would say, Toronto, they are in a very unique position. It is only good business for Toronto FC to spend money to get butts in seats. And you hope that that investment will bring results in the field. It did with Sebastian Giovinco. It didn't with these two guys. And you look around the league, I think, and maybe Josh Brownhill could have Sam Surridge level success. Okay? But I don't think Toronto's getting the rewards from that on the field or off the field over the next 2 years at the same level that they truly need. So they need to use, to Alex's point about the 4 U22 spots, that's, I think, where they need to become far better at and far more strategic. And they're still, I feel, required to spend big on a name that's going to attract people. And I don't like this idea of just catering to like one market and one fan base. And not to go on this Woodbridge rant, but in Canada soccer, it's been such a misstep over and over and over again to cater to this North Toronto Italian market that doesn't come out in support. The reason York United are up there was, that's going to work because of Woodbridge and York region. They don't come out. And the OSA, the stadium that they built there, great example of that. TFC2 were up there, and they would get 10 people don't come out up there. And you saw that happen, time and time again with TFC. Yeah, they came for the Charlotte game. And yeah, people came down when the big Italian teams would come on friendlies to play TFC players for 45 minutes and TFC2 players for another 45 minutes. But it isn't consistent. So, and I would say this if Toronto FC, if Toronto FC were like, let's go sign a big Portuguese player. If the right player happens to be Portuguese, amazing. But don't just go out and try to cater to like some market that you think you can exploit for, a consistent period, because it won't be. It will always be a novelty. So I just hope they do a better job of that.
I think the biggest thing for me with Toronto FC is, and this can go to any club as well, maybe this Brownhill guy is it, or somebody like him that you haven't necessarily heard a ton about, not exactly a star. He comes in and maybe that translates into success in MLS.
Sam Surridge, great example.
Sam Surridge, Kevin Denke, he was a record signing when he came in. Manuel Latela hasn't gone the way that Atlanta United would have hoped, but that was probably a smart signing to get him from Middlesbrough. I think that success is the most important thing. Build a winning team and people will come out. If you build a 15th place team and you have 2 superstars on it that are recognizable names, well, we've seen from example, that doesn't work. So I think the most important thing, and this can come from the U22 slots, as we've seen with the Whitecaps and throughout MLS, is if you build a winning team, specifically on those U22 spots, and you hit on at least one of your DPs, whether or not he's a marketable, famous name or not, winning is the most important thing. And I think that has to be the priority for TFC when they're building this roster. It can't be from the commercial lens that it was under Bill Manning, clearly.
Well, I just think that it has to be a mixed commercial lens. And like Kevin Denke is not going to do it, even if that makes you a top 4 team. Will they have more butts in seats? Yes. Will they have more sellouts potentially? Yes. But are they getting a bigger market share in a very crowded Toronto market? That's what makes it so complicated. Are they getting more, column inches would be like the old term, but are they getting more relevancy with a player like that? It just requires so much more that I think they have to pay a premium, and they have to have one name in order for the whole thing to be successful.
But even then, like with Insigne, Bernardeschi was unique because he actually spoke. But a lot of these stars you don't see speak. They live pretty quiet, private lives. Like it's that part too of like the glitz and glamour. Like it's different because with the NHL guys, like you hear and see from them all the freaking time, just because it's, the English speaking market, the media is always on them. For TFC as well, like success does help because all of a sudden you're leading more sports shows of, this Toronto team is back. There's just more buzz, butts and seats. So I would agree with success. I think they just have to look at a lens of what's a winning team. The problem with the Insigne or Bernardeschi is you could have had one of them and may have been a very successful team. The 2 of them, from a pure footballing standpoint, 2 inverted wingers, one that doesn't really like to track back a whole lot unless pushed to do so, stylistically just didn't work. And I think there's a room for a roster build where you build the best team, you get the DPs of the Denke, Evander, Gald, Kubas mold that are maybe less sexy but win you football matches, and then there's still room for a superstar that leads the line, or is a superstar right winger, or even a superstar center back. I think that's something that the door is open to, but I think ultimately the focus just has to be on a football team. Heck, Toronto 2017, they were an excellent football team. That's what people you can forget they had Giovinco and all these guys, but Altidore worked so well with that team. Bradley worked so well with that team. It was a star-studded, functional team. You don't even want to do what's going on in Miami, where, they're fun. They get all these great players, but they're not necessarily a fully functional team, and they're flawed.
They're not a team at all
because of the model they've built. LAFC is the perfect example where you can have a star like a Giroud, and he was a secondary piece, and they eventually moved on and are going to try to bring in a different star, but because their team works so well. I think Toronto has to get caught up in more of those models, because even as we see in Miami are irrelevant in Fort Lauderdale. We saw it when we went, and the crowd was half empty, because there's just, soccer has changed so much in this continent that long gone are the days of just Beckham coming and there being a buzz. Between him and Messi and all these big guys, a World Cup next year, people are soccered out. At the end of the day, they just want to go watch good, fun, entertaining soccer. And if there's a star or two there, great. But at the end of the day, I don't think that should be what's driving you, because I think long term, like you see it in the NHL, you see in the NBA, you can have terrible teams in the NBA. If they don't win, like, you can have the best stars. They don't care. And I think soccer's kind of shifting towards that way.
You know what this Club World Cup has taught me, Ben? I think you'll appreciate this. I'm talking to a lot of Brazilians as well. You look at a player like Estevão from Palmeiras. I don't know if you guys know the 17-year-old. He scored a couple of goals in this tournament, and he's off to Chelsea. The thing that people continually say is, man, he's going to have such a hard time in the Premier League with the physicality. And he's clearly a technically gifted player, very, very blessed, and an excellent player. But it will be very different playing in the Prem week in and week out. And we've seen a lot of South American players, particularly teenagers, really struggle with a lot of the adjustment elements of going to the Premier League. I think of John Duran, someone who would have been compared to Estevão in terms of technical ability and certainly size and weaknesses when he joined Chicago Fire, and had the opportunity that he did there to grow into a strong forward and a much better forward, albeit for a short period, to then go to the Premier League. He might be a very unique example. But I think that Toronto FC need to try and find some players like that who are South American, looking to make a jump, kind of on the cusp, but they have some flaw to their game that can be strengthened in MLS. And you have them for maybe a short period. But I do think that that's where a team like Toronto FC needs to drive their focus. Because if you do this 5 times, I genuinely think that you will find a John Duran type. And hopefully you have him longer than Chicago, a year and a half. But I think the way that this league is going, and particularly where Toronto FC is at now, you need to do that. You need to hit on that more than you need to hit on Insigne playing to the level of his contract. Because there will be a Lewandowski type or a Jamie Vardy type. Maybe not in Toronto, but I think that those guys continue to come. But where TFC really need to improve is finding a John Duran.